It was supposed to be a quiet season for our family, a period of healing, of gentle routines and slow mornings. My daughter Lily, just 10 years old, had returned home from a grueling spinal surgery. She was born with spina bifida, and after years of therapy, doctor visits, and emotional hurdles, her latest operation had offered new hope. The recovery was long, the nights were sleepless, and watching her relearn basic movement again was both heartbreaking and inspiring. As her father, I wanted nothing more than to make her life easier, safer, and more comfortable. The decision to build the wheelchair ramp was immediate. Our 2-story home had just 3 small steps leading to the porch, but even those were now impossible for Lily to navigate. Her physical therapist specifically recommended a ramp with a gentle incline and railings, something she could practice on daily. I didn't wait. I called a licensed contractor, paid out of pocket, and ensured we got the necessary city permits. Being the county sheriff didn't grant me special privileges, but it did give me a thorough understanding of compliance laws, especially ADA regulations. Everything was filed correctly, inspected, and approved. By all accounts, it was legal, functional, and necessary. But I forgot to consider one crucial thing: Karen Brewster. Karen was the president of our HOA, a position she wore like a sheriff's badge at a Wild West show. She took her role to absurd extremes, patrolling the neighborhood in her golf cart, measuring mailbox distances with a ruler, and leaving passive-aggressive notes on flower beds that violated uniform landscaping code. In the community's online group, she was infamous for uploading photos of people's homes with captions like, "Does this look like pride to you?" It didn't matter if the trash bins were out an hour too early or if someone planted tulips instead of HOA-approved pansies. Karen would find it, document it, and fine it. So when the ramp was built, I knew there would be noise, but I didn't expect the fury that followed. Within 24 hours, I received the first violation letter in my mailbox. The letter claimed that the external structure was added without HOA visual impact approval and needed to be removed within 10 days. It was typed, signed in Karen's looping cursive, and accompanied by a printed photo of the ramp from across the street. I nearly laughed, until I realized she was dead serious. I wrote back immediately, attaching copies of the ADA compliance certification, city permit, and even Lily's discharge papers. I hand-delivered the packet to her door. She didn't open it. She just glared at me from behind the blinds. The next morning, new notices were taped to my door with masking tape, warning of escalating fines if the unsanctioned ramp wasn't removed. The tone wasn't just aggressive, it was personal. One of the notes read, "Just because you're law enforcement doesn't mean you're above community standards." What began as petty harassment escalated quickly. Karen began issuing daily fines, $150 per day for non-compliance. The HOA board, which she ran like a dictatorship, rubber-stamped every one of her decisions. She even held a private board meeting without informing us, voted to classify the ramp as a permanent aesthetic modification, and claimed it required pre-approval. The irony? No such rule existed in the HOA bylaws. I checked every page. At first, I tried to take the high road. I emailed her requesting a conversation. I even offered to meet at the community center to discuss a compromise. Maybe paint the ramp to match the trim of the house or plant a few hedges to hide. But Karen didn't want a compromise. She wanted control. She responded with a one-line email. "Remove the structure or face legal consequences." This wasn't just a violation of neighborly decency. This was a direct attack on a child's right to mobility and on our family's right to live with dignity. Megan, my wife, was livid. "How dare she turn Lily's recovery into a battlefield," she said, pacing the kitchen one night as I tried to soothe our daughter. Lily had overheard us arguing. Her small voice cut through the room. "Daddy, am I the reason we're in trouble?" That was the moment I knew this wasn't about Karen anymore. It was about sending a message, not just to her, but to every parent who'd ever felt cornered by bureaucracy wrapped in a blazer. I told Lily that night, "You are never the problem. You are the reason we stand our ground." But Karen wasn't done. She began rallying neighbors, spreading rumors that the ramp would attract lawsuits, decrease property value, and make our block look like a hospital zone. A few residents, emboldened by Karen's pressure, began avoiding eye contact. Some even whispered as we passed. But there were others, good folks, who quietly supported us. A retired veteran across the street, whose wife used a walker, sent over a basket of muffins with a handwritten note. "Your ramp is a sign of strength, not shame. Don't let them bully you." As the fines piled up, now totaling over $2,000, I contacted an attorney. He confirmed what I already knew. We were within our rights. Federal law trumped HOA whims, but litigation would take time. Meanwhile, Lily's world was shrinking. She refused to go outside. The joy she once felt from rolling down her ramp faded. One night, I found her drawing with crayons. Pictures of herself with wheels crossed out, replaced by stick legs. "If I didn't need the ramp," she said, "Karen wouldn't be mad." That night, I sat in the dark on the porch watching the quiet street, thinking of every oath I'd sworn to protect the vulnerable. Karen had crossed a line, a moral one, if not yet a legal one, and something told me she wasn't finished. There was something wild in her eyes lately, a crack in the mask of suburban civility. I knew then that this wasn't just about HOA violations anymore. It was a power game, and Karen was starting to lose control. I just didn't know how far she was willing to go to get it back, and how soon my daughter would be caught in her crosshairs. It was the kind of morning that makes you forget trouble exists. The kind where the sun filters through the trees just right, casting golden light across your lawn, and the scent of fresh muffins baking inside your home makes it feel like the world is at peace. I was finally off duty, wearing my oldest jeans, hedge clippers in hand, trimming the overgrowth along our backyard fence. Megan was inside, humming softly in the kitchen while baking blueberry muffins, Lily's favorite. Our daughter, after weeks of pain and hospital recovery, had just received her new power wheelchair, and she'd been waiting all week to test it on the ramp. She was bundled up in her favorite hoodie, her eyes full of hope and excitement. Watching her carefully maneuver herself out the front door, rolling down the gentle slope we'd installed just for her, made my heart swell with pride. This ramp wasn't just a structure, it was a small piece of freedom she'd fought for. But that piece shattered in an instant. A sharp scream sliced through the quiet. Not just any scream. Lily's scream. High-pitched, terrified, the kind that instantly rips a father's soul in half. I dropped the clippers without thinking, bolted through the backyard, sprinting around the side of the house faster than I thought a man my age could. My boots hit the pavement as I rounded the porch, and what I saw made my blood run cold. Karen Brewster stood at the foot of the ramp, her body rigid with rage, her eyes wild and unblinking. But it wasn't the look. In her eyes that froze me, it was the weapon in her hand. A silver revolver, trembling in her grip, pointed directly at my 10-year-old daughter. Lily had stopped mid-ramp, paralyzed not by her condition but by pure fear. Her hands hovered near her wheelchair controls, her lips trembling. Her face, once beaming with joy just minutes ago, was now frozen in silent panic. I could see her, trying to shrink into herself, as if she believed that if she stayed perfectly still, maybe this wasn't happening. Karen was yelling, her voice shaking with hysteria. "Get off the structure! Get off the ramp! This is private property, and that thing is a code violation! You're trespassing! Do you hear me?" I couldn't comprehend what I was hearing. My daughter, in her own yard, being screamed at by an armed woman over a wheelchair ramp. It was as if the twisted depths of Karen's HOA obsession had finally snapped into something criminal. The neighbors started to gather. I saw Mrs. Levinson from 2 doors down, standing frozen on the sidewalk, her hand clutching her phone. "Someone call the police," someone yelled, though it was more reflex than necessity, because the police were already here. Me. I raised my hands instinctively, stepping slowly into view so Karen could see me, feel the weight of my presence. "Karen," I said, trying to keep my voice calm, "put the gun down." She spun toward me, startled but not enough to lower the weapon. Her grip tightened. "Stay back, Dan. She's violating community code. This is an unauthorized structure, and she has no right to be—" "That's my daughter you're pointing a weapon at," I said flatly, carefully enunciating each word, drawing on every year of law enforcement training I had. "You need to lower the gun. Right now." Her eyes darted between me and Lily, unsure which threat to handle first. Her hand began to tremble. "You think just because you wear a badge, you're above the law. This neighborhood has standards, rules, and none of them justify threatening a disabled child with a firearm," I replied. My voice dropped into the tone I reserve for suspects holding hostages. "Karen, you are holding a deadly weapon. You're endangering a minor. Put it down before you do something you can't take back." For a long, horrible second, I wasn't sure what she would do. Her eyes darted, her jaw clenched, and the gun twitched. And then, as if something in her finally cracked, she lowered the barrel, but not all the way. She didn't drop it, just let it sag toward the ground. It was enough. I moved. In 3 strides, I was beside her, my hand on the revolver, disarming her in one swift motion. I didn't shove her, didn't slam her against the pavement, though every nerve in my body screamed to do so. Instead, I took the gun, engaged the safety, and called into my radio. "Unit 312, I need immediate backup at my residence. 1032, suspect is armed, detained, no shots fired." Karen looked stunned. Her mouth opened and closed, like she hadn't processed what had just happened. "This is a mistake," she whispered. "You don't understand. She shouldn't be here, this whole ramp. It's not approved." "She lives here," I snapped, unable to contain the fury in my voice now. "That little girl you pointed a gun at lives in this house. That ramp is the only way she can get outside, and you just turned it into a war zone." By now, 3 patrol cars had arrived. My deputies poured out, weapons holstered but hands ready. Karen barely resisted as they cuffed her, though she muttered the entire time about bylaws, aesthetics, and neighborhood integrity. One officer read her rights, while another gently took the revolver from me and logged it into evidence. I walked over to Lily, who hadn't moved. Megan had joined her by then, wrapping her in a protective embrace. Lily was crying quietly, her face buried in her mom's chest. "It's okay, baby," I whispered, kneeling beside them. "You're safe. She's gone. No one's ever going to hurt you like that again?" That night, the street was silent. Karen had been booked into county jail, charged with aggravated assault with a deadly weapon, endangerment of a minor, and unlawful intimidation. My neighbors had all come by, each in varying states of shock. One man brought us dinner. Another, woman from a few blocks down, handed us a bouquet of roses and said, "We're sorry. We should have said something sooner." But I didn't care about gestures. Not then. I just wanted Lily to sleep without nightmares. I wanted Megan to stop crying in the pantry where she thought I couldn't hear her. I wanted our home to feel like home again. Karen had turned a ramp, a simple symbol of mobility, into the center of a battlefield. And in doing so, she'd exposed something ugly about control, about how power in the wrong hands becomes a weapon. She thought she was enforcing order. What she didn't know was that she'd just ignited a reckoning, because this time, the man she tried to push had a badge, and he wasn't going to let it slide. The moment Karen's wrists clicked into the handcuffs, the energy in the neighborhood shifted. She stood there, rigid and shaking, her mouth moving rapidly as if trying to piece together an argument that might erase what she'd just done. But there was no undoing it now. The officers, my own deputies, treated her with the same protocol we used on any armed suspect. One of them read her rights in a calm, neutral voice, as another carefully retrieved the revolver she had used to terrorize my daughter. She kept insisting it was a misunderstanding, that she was simply trying to uphold the rules of the community. "It's not about the girl, it's about the structure," she kept saying, as though that might somehow justify pointing a loaded weapon at a disabled child. Her words rang hollow, broken, devoid of humanity. I stood back, watching, my badge now displayed openly on my belt, not to assert authority, but to affirm that justice was being served, even if it was personal this time. As she was led to the patrol car, her eyes darted around the cul-de-sac, seeking out allies. But none came. The same neighbors who once waved politely at her HOA announcements were now keeping their distance. A few watched from their porches, arms crossed, faces hard, with disbelief. Some even filmed it. One man muttered to his wife, "I always said she'd go too far." Another woman, who had previously shared Facebook posts applauding Karen's commitment to order, quickly ducked back inside, drawing her curtains. The silence in the neighborhood was louder than any protest. It was the silence of shame, of people realizing they had let someone like Karen wield unchecked power for far too long. I turned my attention back to my home, where Megan was holding Lily in the doorway, rocking her gently. My daughter's face was pale, her small hands still trembling from the shock. I walked up the ramp and wrapped them both in my arms. "She's gone," I whispered. "It's over." But we all knew that wasn't true. Not yet. The physical threat might have passed, but the emotional fallout was just beginning. That night, Lily didn't want to sleep alone. She clung to Megan's side like a lifeline, flinching at every creak in the hallway. Megan kept the lights on, humming lullabies, long past midnight. As for me, I sat in the living room with a cup of coffee gone cold, watching the front yard through the window, trying to process what the hell had just happened. Word spread faster than I expected. Before the sun rose the next day, the incident had made the rounds on local news stations. By 8 a.m., I had a voicemail inbox filled with interview requests, statements from disability rights groups, and even inquiries from legal watchdog organizations. The headline was chilling. "Sheriff's daughter threatened by HOA president with firearm over disability ramp." News vans showed up by noon, parking a respectful distance away, but making it clear this wasn't going to disappear quietly. Karen's mugshot, cold, wild-eyed, flashed across TV screens across the county. But what truly shook people wasn't the image. It was the story. A child, a wheelchair, a ramp, and a woman who lost her mind over perceived aesthetic violations. It was surreal, almost unbelievable, but it was all true. Karen's initial court hearing was scheduled within 48 hours. The charges were serious: aggravated assault with a deadly weapon, endangering a minor, unlawful intimidation, and criminal misuse of a firearm. Given the mountain of evidence, including multiple eyewitness statements, video footage from a neighbor's Ring camera, and my own sworn affidavit, the prosecution didn't hesitate to request bail be denied. Her attorney, a slick-suited man who looked like he'd been pulled out of a corporate litigation office, argued that she was not a threat and merely reacted poorly under stress. But the judge, an older woman who'd raised 3 children of her own, saw through the act. "Stress does not justify pointing a gun at a child," she said firmly. Bail was set high, $200,000, and even then the message was clear. This was not a slap-on-the-wrist case. Meanwhile, back in the neighborhood, things began to shift. The once untouchable HOA board, stacked with Karen's loyalists, suddenly found themselves under intense scrutiny. Residents started asking questions. Why had they allowed one woman to issue fines without oversight? Why had they turned a blind eye to her increasingly hostile behavior? A petition began circulating to hold an emergency election and restructure the board entirely. Within a week, more than half the homeowners had signed it. A woman named Angela, a mother of 3 and an occupational therapist, stepped forward as a candidate for HOA president. She came to our door with a pie and a promise. "Your daughter deserves better," she said, "and so do all of us." The tide was turning, and for the first time I felt a glimmer of hope that maybe, just maybe, this nightmare would lead to something better. But Lily still wasn't the same. She used to fly down that ramp with joy, hair blowing in the wind, laughing as she practiced her independence. Now she hesitated. She looked at it like it was haunted. Her therapy sessions became quieter. Her artwork, once filled with bright colors, now had dark scribbles and stick figures with blank faces. Megan did everything she could, long walks, soft talks, even visits from Lily's favorite cousin. But trauma doesn't dissolve with distractions. One night, as I was tucking her in, she looked up and whispered, "Is she going to come back?" That question broke me in a way I didn't know I could break. "No," I said, brushing the hair from her face. "She's gone, and she won't ever hurt you again." Karen's arrest didn't just shake the community. It exposed something deeper. People began examining their own silence. Those who had once laughed at her Karenisms now spoke with regret. One neighbor confessed, "I thought she was just eccentric. I never imagined she'd do that." Others began opening up about their own run-ins with her, threats over mailbox paint colors, fines for children leaving bikes on the lawn, warnings about non-compliant lawn chairs. The more stories that emerged, the more people realized they had enabled her reign of terror with their silence. By the time her formal arraignment took place, public opinion had solidified. Karen was no longer a misunderstood stickler for rules. She was a symbol of unchecked power gone mad. Protesters gathered outside the courthouse not in anger, but in support of disability rights. Signs reading "Access is a right, not an option," and "Lily's ramp stays" filled the steps. National media picked up the story. For a brief moment, our little town became the epicenter of a national conversation about HOAs, disability rights, and the power of community to rise against abuse. That evening, as the sun set behind our house, Megan and I sat on the porch while Lily drew with chalk on the driveway. For the first time since the incident, she smiled again. Not a forced, wary smile, but a real one. I watched her draw a ramp in yellow chalk, leading to a big house with a happy stick girl in a pink wheelchair. And right there, in that simple act, I saw something incredible. We weren't just healing. We were winning. The courthouse was quiet the day Karen stood before the judge, but the tension in the room was thick enough to suffocate. A month had passed since that terrifying day when she pointed a loaded gun at my daughter, and during that time, the legal machinery had moved with swift precision. The district attorney, bolstered by an overwhelming stack of evidence, including security footage from 2 angles, statements from multiple eyewitnesses, and my own sworn testimony as sheriff, presented a case so airtight that even Karen's defense team knew it was futile to fight it. Her lawyer, now visibly tired and far less confident than he had been during her bail hearing, advised her to plead no contest. Karen stood rigid in her blazer, ironically the same red one she wore the day of the incident, and nodded stiffly as the judge read the charges: aggravated assault with a deadly weapon, endangering the welfare of a child, and unlawful use of a firearm. The words carried the weight of her decisions. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her silence said everything. The sentencing felt just. 2 years of house arrest, 1,000 hours of community service, specifically to be carried out in disability advocacy organizations, and a permanent ban from serving on any HOA board in the county. She was also fined $50,000 in damages, half of which was awarded to a fund for families in the area needing ADA-compliant home modifications. I didn't attend the sentencing for closure. I attended for every father who'd ever been told to. Comply or else, for every child who'd been made to feel like their presence was an inconvenience, and for my daughter, who had every right to feel safe on her own front porch. When the judge pronounced the final ruling, a ripple of emotion passed through the spectators' benches. No applause, no cheers, just quiet exhalations of relief. But justice in the courtroom was only part of the healing. Back in our neighborhood, real change had already begun to take root. The HOA, once Karen's personal kingdom, crumbled within a week of her arrest. The emergency meeting we all demanded was held in the community center, this time packed with people who had once avoided involvement. Those who had been silent now spoke. Those who had been fearful now found their voices. The remaining board members resigned under pressure, and a new election was held in a matter of days. Angela Martinez, the occupational therapist who had brought us pie and understanding, was elected HOA president in a landslide. Her first act was to publicly apologize on behalf of the board for allowing power to become a weapon against a child. Her second was to immediately repeal every violation and fine that had been levied against us. But Angela didn't stop there. She led an initiative to revise the HOA charter with the help of local legal experts and disability advocates. The new charter specifically protected homeowners' rights under the Americans with Disabilities Act and established strict limitations on unilateral enforcement powers. No longer would a single individual be allowed to act as judge, jury, and executioner over neighborhood decisions. Transparency became a requirement. So did empathy. The most touching gesture came 2 weeks later. Angela and the new board invited us to a special ceremony at the neighborhood park, the one Karen had once claimed should be reserved for HOA-approved events only. With media cameras respectfully positioned at the edges, Angela stood at the podium and announced that the park would be renamed Lily's Place. A new sign was unveiled, colorful and welcoming, with a small plaque beneath it that read, "In honor of Lily Holloway, whose courage reminded us what community truly means." Lily, holding Megan's hand and wearing her favorite pink hoodie, beamed with a mixture of pride and shyness as the crowd gave her a standing ovation. In the months that followed, Lily began to smile more often. Her therapy sessions grew easier. She even started painting again, this time with bright colors and radiant skies. The ramp, once a symbol of tension and conflict, became her favorite place. She would roll down it every morning, pausing at the bottom to look out over the street as if reclaiming her place in the world. Neighbors began waving again, this time with genuine warmth. They brought over cupcakes, cards, even hand-drawn pictures from their kids. One little boy left a note on our doorstep that said, "Your ramp is awesome. Can I race you down it sometime?" Returned to my duties at the sheriff's department with a deeper sense of what justice really meant. It's not just about arrests and convictions. It's about standing between the vulnerable and the powerful, even when the powerful wear khakis and live in cul-de-sacs. It's about recognizing that danger doesn't always come in the form of hardened criminals. Sometimes it comes from a neighbor with a clipboard and too much authority. I made it a personal mission to speak at community meetings across the county about HOA reform, ADA awareness, and the importance of standing up when something feels wrong, even when it's uncomfortable. Especially then. Megan took up writing again, penning an essay for a national parenting magazine titled "The Ramp That Saved My Daughter." It went viral, shared by advocacy groups and parents around the country who had their own HOA horror stories. We heard from people in Minnesota, Florida, even Canada, families who had faced discrimination, been threatened with lawsuits, or been made to feel like their children's needs were a burden. Lily's story gave them courage, and her ramp became a symbol far beyond our neighborhood. Of course, not everything healed overnight. Lily still had nights where she cried without explanation. She would sometimes ask if Karen was still mad, and we would gently remind her that Karen was no longer part of our lives. Trauma, especially in children, is a slow storm to pass. But the difference now was that Lily had her community. She had her ramp, and she had parents who were no longer fighting alone. Sometimes in the early mornings before school, I sit by the window with my coffee and watch her. She wheels herself down the ramp with ease now, backpack strapped behind her, hair tied in a messy ponytail, waving to Mrs. Levinson across the street or laughing as our dog chases squirrels across the yard. There's strength in her that I never fully appreciated before. Not just physical, but emotional. She's been through fire and she's still smiling, and every time I see her roll down that ramp, I remind myself of a simple truth. She faced a gun and she won. If this story moved you, made you feel something, or opened your eyes to the hidden power struggles behind those white picket fences, we need your voice. These aren't just isolated incidents. Families everywhere are dealing with overreaching HOA boards, unchecked authority, and battles they never asked for. But change starts with awareness, and awareness starts with sharing. If you believe in standing up for what's right, if you believe every child deserves safety, respect, and access, and if you believe HOAs shouldn't be above the law, then like, comment, and share this story to help spread the message. Subscribe to The HOA Stories for more true tales of justice, resilience, and real people fighting back. Tell us your HOA horror story in the comments, because you're not alone. And together we can make sure the next Lily doesn't have to face this fight. This is The HOA Stories, where silence ends and justice begins.